Hello everybody, this is Skul, the Hero Slayer. Something a little bit different because I don't normally do a whole lot of previews on this channel, although I've been trying to do more and more of them when I get the opportunity, and that is exactly what this is. I should probably preface by saying this is not like a review build or anything, this is not the full game or anything close to it. This is actually a preview beta that was given out to just content creators in general to take a look at the game and then to stream it and to just look at it. So everything, of course, in this video I should probably mention is subject to change, and some of the mechanics and things are not currently available because it is, after all, an early beta. So what the heck is it? Well, it is a 2D sort of roguelite platformer. It's very much in the vein of something like Rogue Legacy, honestly, is the kind of... It's the game that reminds me the most of in terms of, you know, this pretty wide genre that we have now. The one that comes to mind for sure is Rogue Legacy, but with a couple of unique mechanics, one in particular. So it does work like you'd probably expect from a, you know, a roguelite sort of platformer. It does work in general like Rogue Legacy and games like that. So you do have lots of side-scrolling and platforming and basic combat and boss fights and finding items to strengthen yourself and stuff like that. But there are a couple of different things here that kind of attracted me to it initially. One is the art style is really nice. It is, of course, pixel art, but it is a very, very pretty pixel art. It is very colorful, has really, really nice use of color, and the backgrounds have this really, like, pretty hand-drawn pixel art look to them. I really like the backgrounds. And it just kind of gives it a sort of atmospheric, sort of dark fantasy or, like, whimsical dark fantasy vibe. It's kind of cool, honestly. I really like the art style. I dig the enemy designs as well, especially the bosses. They look pretty neat as, like, just like human heroes and other more beastly enemies and stuff later on. It's pretty cool. But what you are seeing in the background right now is the main sort of draw of the game, the main difference, its unique game mechanic, and that would be the skulls. And this is probably the coolest part of it to me because it adds a lot of variety and a lot of interesting aspects actually to make each playthrough different, which is something that a lot of roguelites try, but not all of them actually accomplish to like a really high degree. In this case though, it's pretty cool. So you of course play as Skul, who is a skeleton, and your main sort of gimmick is that you can take off your skull. And you see it sometimes in cutscenes where he like takes it off and puts something into his ribcage as like an item to keep, like a map and stuff like that, which is pretty funny. And during normal gameplay, you can also just chuck it. You just throw the skull at other enemies and things like that. And you can also teleport to the current location of the skull or just walk over and pick it up, whichever one you want to do. So it's a pretty fun little thing that allows you to like cross gaps a little bit easier or evade enemy attacks by throwing the skull behind you and then like smacking them a couple times and then teleporting behind you so that you avoid their retaliation and stuff like that. It's a fun little mechanic that gives your base character a fair amount of mobility and some fun little combos and stuff to do with it. However, more so than that is you will find other skulls. During gameplay, there will be these skull piles that you can find, and you can sort of root through them and one skull will pop out. You can also sometimes buy them in shops and run expectedly. And these skulls, you just put them on. Your character just plops them on and they become another character entirely, basically. It's sort of like changing classes or changing characters. And that is unusual for a roguelite because generally speaking, the character is something you choose before the run and you do the entire run as the character you chose. But in this case, you actually can change characters' passive skill sets around by finding and putting on these new skulls, which is really cool, and it's something that I very much approve of because, like I said, it increases the variety a lot when you can actually switch characters mid-run, and also it adds a lot to the just like overall variety in character builds and things, because if you can think about all the various item synergies and stuff that you tend to get in games like this, but then being able to combine it with multiple characters that you can switch through at will, that adds a lot of build variety, and it's actually a really neat mechanic. The skulls are really quite fun as well, I gotta say. They are a highlight of the game, not only because it's just an interesting mechanic, but because they are pretty satisfying. A lot of the attack animations and things have a lot of impact to them, like the one that you're seeing right now in the background is the warrior skull, big old giant sword, and a big ground slam attack. And it really feels strong. It feels incredibly powerful. It shakes the screen, and it's a huge amount of impact. Enemies go flying and take extra damage when they hit ceilings and walls and stuff like that. It makes the melee combat very satisfying, and I think they've done a really good job at making the like slow, powerful attacks actually feel powerful. Not just slow and sluggish, but genuinely like high impact, huge damage kind of powerful attacks, which can be difficult. And I always notice that sort of thing because I know how difficult it is sometimes to sort of balance, you know, slow, hard-hitting attacks and make them feel anything other than just kind of unresponsive. So they've actually done a really good job with that. But the other skulls themselves have some pretty neat things to them. They all have a couple of passives. Not all of the passives actually work in the beta right now, but they each have some passives that alter how they work. Like, for instance, the warrior skull that you were seeing earlier changes your dash. Normally you can dash twice in a row, but the warrior skull changes it to only one dash. However, it does damage. It acts like a tackle, basically. So you can avoid enemy attacks and damage them at the same time. It also, of course, changes your weapon and your main attack combo. Of course, the warrior has that giant greatsword thing. It's more like a slab of steel on a stick, and it does tons of damage, but very slowly. And they will also have a couple of abilities. Sometimes just one ability. It depends on the skull, and sometimes two. So every skull can have some active abilities. They will all at least have one. And that will, of course, they're on cooldown, so they are just special attacks, things for you to use that change how the skull work and help to give it more character, you could say, because they are some of the main things that you'll be using as that, well, character. And they also have a switch attack, interestingly enough, because you can actually hold two skulls at once, which is awesome. You don't just change characters whenever you pick one up, but you can actually have two that you switch between on a short cooldown. And every skull, even your main starting skull, that is just your basic attacks, they all have switch attacks that will come out as soon as you switch to them. The warriors is like a big shoulder check, like long distance charge, does a ton of damage and knocks enemies back a lot. Really good to switch to when you're facing a lot of them in front of you, where you need to sort of get out of a tough situation that you may have been like stun locked in or something, and allows you to push through. And your basic skull has things like a sort of whirlwind. You sort of whirl this bone around Marowak style and attack everything around you for a short time. So they're pretty cool. But where it gets really, really interesting is the skull rarities. So the skulls do in fact have rarities. They have like common and rare and stuff like that. I'm sure there are more, but this is just some of the ones that I've encountered so far. And for one, I should say that more common skulls are not weak. The warrior that we've been talking about and showing in the background is actually a common skull, and it's very powerful. It's just that the rarer skulls tend to be more complicated to use and have more abilities that you need to synergize to make them more effective, whereas the more common skulls are generally pretty straightforward and just powerful by existing. And basically, they don't have like a higher skill ceiling, you could say, most of the time. And where it gets really, really unique are the unique skulls. Sometimes you will come across one of these skull piles that is a giant skull pile with a huge sword stuck in it and a bunch of jewelry and stuff on it. That will give you a unique skull, and these are kind of like your legendary characters, effectively. They are very powerful, they have a lot of abilities and a lot of passives and things, and they drastically change the way that you actually play. And my best run so far was when I actually had two unique skulls at once, and these get really, really cool. The ones that I've encountered so far are the Werewolf and the Ninja. The Werewolf is probably like you'd expect. It's a werewolf. It has very high movement speed and very fast, sort of what you're seeing right now, very fast like clawing melee attacks. Pretty much like an infinite combo as well. It can just keep slashing at things. It has a very long distance dodge and an ability that it can use that's sort of like that right there, which is a forward dash with, like, I think it has some immunity frames, and you can actually store up to 3 of those at once. So you can, it's just a huge mobility. It's a class with like a ton of mobility, allows you to move really fast and slash at things. It's a lot of fun, and its switch attack is actually like a big avoidance dash that's really useful in boss fights and things. You can even use it in midair to extend your jumps and the like. And the Ninja changes everything. The Ninja is really fast. It has, instead of like a normal like 2 or 3 hit combo, like a lot of these skulls have, the Ninja actually has like a 5-hit combo that ends with like a forward rushing slash. So it actually moves you forward, which is kind of unusual because most of the other attacks don't do that. But the Ninja is pretty much constantly in motion. It changes your dash to like a sort of after image dash that I think has some immunity frames, so you can sort of dash twice and actually go through attacks. Its aerial attack is like a falling blade kind of slash thingy that's really fun to use. Of course, you have got to make sure you're not over like a pit of spikes or anything when you use it, because it does take you diagonally down forward. Unlike some other skulls mid-air attacks that actually have you float in the air, this one actually takes you down to the ground. And its other abilities involve things like throwing a huge shuriken that goes through enemies and actually boomerangs back to you and does tons of damage both trips, and a forward dash that then slashes everything in the way that you dashed through. So it's really good for avoidance and doing damage. You can dash through a whole line of enemies and slash them all up all at once, which is super cool. And the switch attack for it actually creates 2 after images of the Ninja around the space where you were standing when you switched, and does like a flurry of attacks. Really good for big enemies and boss fights and the like, because it does a ton of damage very, very quickly. It's really cool, honestly. So that's just a couple of the more unique skulls that I found so far, and they're a lot of fun. And the fact that you can actually hold multiple of them and then combine all of these abilities and attacks with the sort of standard roguelite finding new items type of progression that you will find, means that there's a lot of build variety in this game, and you can end up with some really crazy stuff. There are also these things called quintessences that I should probably mention that are kind of like spells. They're like big cooldown based spells that you can cast. You can find and equip them separately from all of your other abilities. You can have one at a time, and they tend to do things like big attacks, like a shower of icicles that freezes enemies, or a very powerful sword that flies forward and then teleports you to wherever it hits. They're pretty neat, honestly, and they of course add to the build variety as well because they're sort of like big crowning abilities that you can find. So I think this is actually one to keep an eye on because the overall like melee combat and everything in it is really satisfying, has a really nice art style, and the whole skull mechanic is a really cool one. It's not necessarily entirely original, but in terms of other roguelites, you don't generally see the ability to switch classes or switch characters mid-run and actually have all these items stay with you and change and actually hold two of them at once even and switch between them. It's a really nice like brawler style of not really Metroidvania, but just like 2D roguelite platformer. It's really awesome, and I've really enjoyed my time with it so far, and I definitely want to keep seeing what's next. You know, I'm sure there are a lot more skulls and things. I hope there's some sort of like crazy mages like liches, or you can summon zombies or something like that, and you can combine that with like a heavy melee class that you can switch to. It just seems like a lot of fun and a lot of enjoyable time trying to find various overpowered builds and things, which is entirely the point of a lot of roguelites like this. As far as release date and price goes, I actually don't know either of those right now. The release date is set for Q1 of 2020, so it could be any time now. I don't actually know when specifically, and I also don't know the price currently. Hopefully it's in like the $15 to $20 range. I think it would be absolutely worth that with the amount of content that is being promised right now. And also there is a meta progression aspect, but I can't really show it to you, and I don't know what it's going to entail because it's not in the beta. You can get these gems from fighting bosses and things, and there's a character that you will obviously be able to spend the gems at back at a hub that you go back to when you die, but since that's currently not in the game, I can't really tell you what that will entail. Maybe unlocking new skulls, maybe unlocking new skills for skulls, I have no idea. So hopefully we get to see more of this sooner rather than later, because it's very promising to be a really enjoyable sort of brawler romp in a roguelite style. So hopefully it comes out fairly soon and we get to see more of it. So I'll link you to the Steam page anyway in the description below this video, even though the game isn't currently out at the time of recording this, just so you can keep an eye on it if you want, wishlist it, whatever you want to do. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the preview. I'll see you guys next time.